Hi, welcome to Video from the Ville. This is state and local government, and I'm Dr. Charles Greenewalt. Today we're going to take a quick look at public finance. We are going to take a much greater look at public finance as we get to the issue areas within state government. But as a quick introduction to public finance, we're just going to cover the basics right now. Why do we budget? Well, we budget because of that basic premise that underlines all of politics and all of economics, and that is that we have unlimited desires and we have limited resources. So we have to budget. We have limited financial resources and multiple demands on these resources. And those demands will always exceed our cash balances, our current assets, our expected cash, and all the financial assets that are generally available to the state. So that's why we budget. What is the definition of budgeting? If you're looking at your PowerPoints, as I hope you are, as we go through this presentation, definition of budgeting, it's the process by which elected and appointed officials, acting in the interest of the governed, determine methods of collecting government resources and securing assets through forms of taxation or appropriation, and then allocating those financial resources based on priorities determined by the democratic political process. End of quote. Let me repeat that again. A definition of budgeting, and you find it in your PowerPoints. I'm not asking you to memorize it, but I do want you to consider the parts of it as we go through it. A process by which elected and appointed officials, acting in the interest of the governed, not in their own interests, determine methods of collecting government resources, securing assets through different forms of taxation or appropriation, then allocate those financial resources based on priorities determined by the democratic political process. Well, budgeting. What is budgeting? Budgeting is nothing more than choosing among priorities, and it occurs annually or biannually. We find that in Pennsylvania we use an annual budget. We have one budget per year, and it must be approved by July 1. If it's not approved by July 1, the state legislature goes into suspension until the budget is approved. What happens in the state house and in the state senate, the sergeants of arms go over to the clocks, which are pendulum clocks, and they stop the pendulum, they stop time, and time will stand still until the budgets are passed, and then the clocks may be restarted. There are some states that only do a budget once every 2 years. This was something that Governor Corbett, former Governor Tom Corbett, wanted to move Pennsylvania from an annual budget to a biannual budget once every 2 years, so that there's less acrimony, there's less argument, there's less hubbub. You just put one budget in place and it lasted 2 years. The problem with the 2-year budget is then you are stuck for those 2 years. You're not able to be nimble. You're not able to change in response and reaction to changing conditions as a yearly budget allows you to do. Thomas Jefferson may have had the best quotation on budgeting. He simply tells us and reminds us the power of a government to tax. The power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to tax is the power to destroy. In other words, the government is taking money away from us so that we don't have the ability to pursue our dreams. We don't have the ability to buy clothes, buy food, build a house. The government, therefore, has stripped the money from us. The power to tax is the power to destroy, according to Thomas Jefferson. Well, what is the generic budgeting process? I gave you that very lengthy definition, but let's go through the 6 steps of a generic budgeting process. You can follow along again on your PowerPoints. Number 1, revenues and expenditures are estimated, revenues and expenditures. Number 2, an executive budget, a governor's budget, is compiled and submitted then to the legislature. The legislature deliberates and issues budgetary approval. Number 4, the executive, the governor, signs the legislation containing the budget into law. Number 6, budget execution occurs when the resources then are allocated to public agencies. And number 6, we have the systematic post-authorization audits. We find that the government, state government, will go in and audit the agencies that receive funding so that they can monitor budgetary compliance. Did they spend the money in the way that the state legislature wanted, and did they follow all state rules and regulations? What are the major sources of revenue for states? Well, about 73% of all state generated revenue comes from taxation. You find about 14% from direct services and 13% is earned on investments. The average state mix of tax revenues, about 35% of all state tax revenues come from individual income taxes, 7% from corporate income taxes, 15% come from selective sales tax, such as gasoline, cigarettes, and alcohol, and about 6% from license fees. The states do vary fantastically. They vary tremendously from state to state in the mix of revenues that they use to find the funds to provide their public services. We find New Hampshire, for example, doesn't have a general sales tax, doesn't have a general income tax, yet it manages to balance its budget every year with a great deal of frugality and by making local governments fund many of their own services. Major expenditures for all governments, well, we find that generally education will lead the pack. Education will be the number one expense for almost all states, and it has been in Pennsylvania until just recently when welfare caught it and exceeded it. But generally, the most expensive, the major expenditure for all states has generally been education. Secondly, been welfare programs. Third would be miscellaneous programs, which means debt interests, utilities, state parks. The fourth major total of major expenditures would be transportation, highway construction. Fifth would be police and corrections, and number 6 would be administration. These are the major expenditures, the things that state spends money on. So, this is a quick overview of state budgets and state finance, and we want you to read the chapter very, very carefully, and then we'll go and take a more detailed look at this area in just a little bit. Okay? All right, well, we're going to stop here and go on to the next topic in state and local